The gym smelled of sweat and rubber mats, the fluorescent lights buzzing faintly above. Students sat cross-legged, watching their instructor, Brandon Scott, pace with smug confidence. His eyes flicked to the janitor, mopping quietly in the corner, Anthony Brooks. Brandon smirked, his voice dripping sarcasm. "Hey Brooks, ever mop a mat mid-spar?" A ripple of laughter spread. Anthony's expression didn't change. Lauren Reed, a sharp-eyed student, shifted uneasily. Brandon pressed harder. "Tell you what, put down that mop. Show my students what a real fighter looks like." The room buzzed with amusement. Anthony paused, grip tightening slightly on the mop. Silence thickened. He turned slowly, eyes steady, voice calm. "You sure you want that?" The laughter faltered. Something in his tone cut deeper than humor. The students leaned forward, amused and curious. Brandon puffed out his chest. "Come on, Brooks, what's the worst that can happen?" His arrogance filled the space. Anthony set the mop aside, his movements deliberate, controlled. Lauren caught a faint tremor in his hands, though not from fear. Brandon spread his arms mockingly. "Ladies and gentlemen, tonight's entertainment, janitor versus sensei." The room chuckled again, though thinner this time. Something in Anthony's posture seemed off. Not sloppy, not rigid, but balanced. A subtle precision only the observant could notice. Lauren frowned, whispering to herself, "That's not normal." Brandon mistook stillness for weakness, swaggering toward the center mat. Students shuffled eagerly, circling. Phones lifted discreetly, ready to capture humiliation. Anthony inhaled deeply, the air heavy, as if he'd been here before.
Lauren Reed's instincts sharpened. She'd trained enough to recognize patterns. Anthony wasn't standing like an untrained man. His feet were planted perfectly, weight distributed evenly. She glanced at her classmates, but no one else seemed to notice. Brandon flexed his arms dramatically, milking the moment. "First lesson, kids. Confidence is key. Watch me break down a mop-wielding janitor." Laughter scattered but thin. Anthony's eyes lowered briefly, shadows flickering across his face. Memories surged. Jonathan Price's fall, the terrible silence that followed, the years of guilt. He forced the thought away. Brandon tapped his fists together, grinning. "Come on, Brooks, don't chicken out now." Anthony looked up, gaze calm. "Are you done talking?" The shift in tone silenced the room. For the first time, Brandon's grin faltered. Brandon laughed nervously, masking his unease. "All right, janitor, show us what you got." His bravado rang hollow, but the students clung to it. Anthony exhaled slowly, lowering into the faintest of stances, subtle enough to escape most eyes. Lauren caught it immediately. Her pulse quickened. That wasn't random posture, it was refined control. She opened her mouth to speak, then stopped. Who would believe her? Brandon raised his hands in mock guard, bouncing on his toes. "See? Easy. Watch closely, everyone." Anthony tilted his head slightly, studying him with a predator's calm. Brandon mistook it for hesitation. He smirked wider. The circle of students leaned in, anticipation thick. No one realized yet. The janitor wasn't stepping into Brandon's show. Brandon had stepped into Anthony's storm.
Brandon jabbed forward suddenly, quick and sharp. The punch whistled through air, but Anthony had already shifted, his body sliding inches aside. Gasps froze. Brandon blinked, stunned, before forcing a laugh. Lucky flinch. He launched again, harder, faster. Each strike carved empty space. Anthony barely moved. Small pivots, subtle leans, effortless sidesteps. Lauren's eyes widened. She whispered, "That's impossible." Brandon's smirk faltered, sweat forming at his temple. He pushed harder, fury in every swing, yet Anthony's breathing remained steady, calm, unbroken. Each miss fed the silence. The students' laughter had died completely, replaced by uneasy awe. Brandon stumbled, fists trembling. Anthony's voice cut the tension softly. "Your shoulder gives it away. Every move." Brandon froze. The janitor wasn't surviving. He was dissecting him in real time. The students exchanged stunned glances. This wasn't luck. It was skill,
Precision. Mastery. Brandon growled, shaking his head violently. "Don't just stand there. Fight back." His voice cracked, desperation bleeding through. Anthony's eyes didn't flicker. "You're already fighting yourself." The words struck harder than fists. Brandon lunged recklessly, throwing combinations. Each one missed by fractions. Anthony's evasions minimal, but flawless. Sweat poured down Brandon's face, his rhythm collapsing. Lauren leaned closer to her classmate, whispering urgently, "This isn't a janitor. He knows things. Professional things." Her friend swallowed hard, unable to deny it. Brandon's fury boiled, but his confidence fractured. For the first time, the authority in his own gym slipped through his fingers. Anthony hadn't thrown a single punch, yet he was already winning.
Anthony's stillness carried weight. Every breath was measured, every movement calculated. He wasn't hiding nerves, he was conserving energy. Lauren's suspicions solidified. She opened her phone discreetly, typing his name into search. Results appeared. Anthony Brooks, alias Silent Storm, 5-time MMA world champion. Her blood ran cold. She glanced back at the mat, watching Brandon, still oblivious. "He's a legend," she whispered, her voice trembling. Brandon shouted, trying to reclaim dominance. "Enough games! You're embarrassing yourself." He charged recklessly. Anthony's foot slid, body lowering with practiced grace. The crowd didn't understand, but Lauren did. She recognized a predator preparing to strike. Brandon's fist swung wide. In that instant, Anthony's eyes shifted. Calm, merciless, inevitable. Silent Storm wasn't a forgotten name. Tonight, his storm was waking again. Brandon's punch sliced air. Anthony's palm moved, gentle, precise, meeting his chest with barely a touch. The impact was silent, yet Brandon's body jolted backward, collapsing onto the mat. Gasps exploded. Students froze, unable to comprehend what they'd seen. Lauren's heart pounded. She knew it wasn't brute force. It was technique honed to perfection. Brandon scrambled up, face red, pride shattering. "Cheap trick," he barked, but his trembling voice betrayed him. Anthony stood calmly, shoulders relaxed. He hadn't broken a sweat. The silence thickened, heavy and suffocating. Brandon's authority evaporated in front of his own students. Anthony's calm gaze locked onto him, quiet but unyielding. "Still want to continue?" Brandon's chest tightened. He had mocked a janitor, but the truth stared back, a storm cloaked in silence.
Brandon's laughter sounded forced now, brittle at the edges. "Fine, lucky shot. Won't happen again." He rushed forward, throwing a flurry of kicks and punches. Anthony flowed like water, each strike passing inches away, never landing. Students gasped louder each time. Their instructor, untouchable until tonight, looked clumsy, frantic, desperate. Brandon's foot slipped. He stumbled, catching himself, but humiliation burned. Anthony finally spoke, calm and surgical. "You're wasting energy. Your fear makes you loud." Brandon's jaw tightened, veins bulging. Lauren whispered, "He's teaching him." Indeed, Anthony wasn't fighting, he was exposing. Every flaw, every arrogance, stripped bare under the weight of silent precision. Brandon's fury ignited, pride refusing to yield. He lunged wildly, eyes blazing. Anthony sighed softly. "You won't hear me twice." The storm deepened. Brandon swung again, reckless with humiliation. Anthony stepped aside once more, placing a single hand on his shoulder, guiding him past harmlessly. The ease was unbearable to watch. Students began whispering among themselves, their respect for Brandon collapsing like fragile glass. Lauren stared in awe, whispering under her breath, "This is Silent Storm." Brandon's chest heaved, anger melting into panic. He tried to hide it, but everyone saw. Anthony didn't boast, didn't gloat. He simply stood, unshaken, as though storms like this had passed before. Brandon finally roared, "Stop running! Fight me like a man!" Anthony's gaze pierced him. "I'm already fighting. You're the only one who doesn't see it." The silence that followed was crushing. Respect shifted permanently that night.
Brandon's face flushed with humiliation. He charged recklessly, desperation overtaking form. Anthony sidestepped effortlessly, guiding him past with a light touch. The ease with which he dismantled Brandon's aggression was almost cruel. Students whispered nervously, confusion spreading through the room. Lauren's fingers trembled as she scrolled through her phone again. Headline after headline confirmed it. Silent Storm, 5-time champion. She glanced up at Anthony, heart racing. He wasn't just a janitor with a secret past. He was a living legend hiding in plain sight. Brandon stumbled back, chest heaving. His eyes darted nervously around the room, realizing the shift. His students no longer looked at him with respect. Their gaze belonged to Anthony now. For the first time, Brandon's kingdom of pride crumbled. Brandon roared in frustration, lunging once more. Anthony's hand lifted, barely touching his wrist. In that instant, Brandon's punch collapsed, redirected harmlessly aside. He lost balance, stumbling to the mat again. Gasps filled the room. Brandon scrambled to his feet, face red with shame, but Anthony remained perfectly composed. The silence of the room thundered louder than any applause. Students exchanged wide-eyed glances, their belief in their sensei unraveling. Lauren whispered, "He's dismantling him without striking back." Brandon clenched his fists, fury turning to panic. Anthony's voice was calm, even gentle. "Strength without control is weakness." The words hung heavy, undeniable. Brandon knew he was being schooled in his own gym. Pride demanded he fight, but fear whispered an undeniable truth. He was already beaten.
Brandon swung again, reckless and wild. Anthony stepped aside, catching his arm, twisting gently, not to break, but to control. Brandon dropped to one knee, groaning in pain, the room erupting in disbelief. Anthony released him instantly, not seeking harm. Brandon staggered back, panting, face drenched in sweat. His students stared in silence, their faith shattered. Anthony's calm demeanor only deepened the contrast. He wasn't just winning, he was teaching. Lauren whispered, "He's holding back. If he wanted, this would be over already." The truth rippled through the crowd, settling like a heavy stone. Brandon's arrogance had brought him here, but Anthony's restraint revealed something greater: discipline, patience, mastery. Brandon's pride refused to surrender, but his body was already telling the truth. Brandon wiped sweat from his brow, eyes burning with humiliation. "You think you're better than me?" His voice cracked. Anthony's gaze was steady. "No, I think you've forgotten what better means." The words struck deeper than any blow. Brandon bellowed, lunging desperately. Anthony caught him mid-charge, pivoting gracefully. In seconds, Brandon was flat on the mat again. Air knocked from his lungs. Silence consumed the room. Students' phones captured everything, their sensei beaten by the janitor. Anthony stepped back, breathing evenly, offering no further strike. His control was terrifying in its elegance. Brandon coughed, shame flooding him. Lauren stared in awe, realizing the legend before her wasn't defined by violence, but by the mercy to restrain it. Anthony Brooks had revealed himself not as a janitor, but as the silent storm reborn.
The crowd of students began to whisper louder. Their instructor had fallen, not once, but repeatedly. Brandon pushed up shakily, his pride unwilling to surrender. "I'm not done," he barked, though his voice betrayed him. Anthony's eyes softened. "Yes, you are." The simplicity of the words struck like a final blow. Brandon staggered forward anyway, but his strikes had lost all sharpness. Anthony guided each one away with surgical precision, never retaliating. Every move was a lesson in humility. Lauren's chest tightened,
torn between pity for Brandon and awe for Anthony. The once confident sensei was reduced to a desperate man, clawing for dignity. Anthony didn't humiliate him further. He simply let him collapse under his own weight. Silence lingered heavy, broken only by Brandon's ragged breath. Brandon dropped to one knee, sweat dripping, chest heaving. His arrogance had shattered, his students watching with wide, disbelieving eyes. Anthony stood tall, calm, unbroken. Lauren whispered into the silence, "Why is he here? Why would a legend hide like this?" The question spread unspoken through the room. Brandon pushed weakly to his feet, but his legs trembled. Anthony moved closer, not as a predator, but as a mentor. His voice carried a weight far heavier than fists. Pride builds walls. Discipline tears them down. Brandon's gaze faltered, the truth undeniable. For years he had ruled this gym with arrogance. Tonight, humility crushed him harder than any strike. The legend hadn't returned to reclaim glory. He had come to remind the world of what glory truly meant.
The whispers grew into stunned murmurs. Students filmed quietly, some lowering their phones out of respect. They weren't watching a fight anymore. They were witnessing history. Brandon staggered once more, but his body betrayed him. Anthony stepped forward, placing a steady hand on his shoulder. Enough. The word carried finality. Brandon froze, chest rising and falling rapidly. His pride screamed to continue, but his body surrendered. Lauren's voice shook as she whispered, "This is over." Brandon's head lowered, shame crashing down heavier than defeat. Anthony didn't gloat, didn't revel. He simply stepped back, leaving Brandon space to breathe. The silence that followed was deafening, filled with awe. For years, Brandon had demanded respect. Tonight, Anthony Brooks earned it, effortlessly, silently, absolutely. Brandon collapsed onto the mat, utterly spent. His students rushed to him, but their eyes betrayed a shift. Respect no longer belonged to him. Anthony picked up his mop quietly, as though the storm had never happened. That simple act spoke louder than victory. Lauren's throat tightened. The legend she had uncovered wasn't basking in triumph. It was returning to the shadows. She couldn't contain herself. "Your silent storm," she blurted, voice trembling. The room fell silent again. Brandon's eyes widened, shame deepening. Anthony paused, but didn't deny it. He only looked at Lauren, his gaze calm but tired. That was a long time ago. The words carried weight, regret wrapped in humility. For Anthony Brooks, the storm wasn't about fame anymore. It was survival.
Lauren's revelation rippled through the crowd. Students whispered, shocked. Phones lit up with searches, headlines confirming what she said. Brandon looked shattered, his own students learning the truth from a stranger. Anthony's shoulders slumped slightly, as if the weight of recognition was heavier than combat. He set the mop back into the bucket, ready to leave. Lauren stepped forward, urgency in her voice. "Why would you hide here? Why this life?" Anthony hesitated, the silence almost unbearable. Finally, he spoke softly. "Because legends don't bury their dead, they live with them." The room froze, his eyes clouded with memory. Jonathan Price, his fall, the guilt that never left. Anthony had not escaped his past. He carried it into every quiet corner, every forgotten gym. Lauren's heart ached as she realized the truth. Anthony wasn't running from failure, he was running from loss. Jonathan Price's name had been buried under trophies, but not in Anthony's soul. Brandon pushed weakly to his feet, clutching his chest, shame eclipsing pain. "You're a fraud," he spat bitterly. Anthony turned slowly, his eyes unflinching. "Fraud?" His voice was calm, steady. "I gave everything. The price was blood I couldn't wash away." The students shifted uneasily, their loyalty slipping further from Brandon. Lauren's eyes softened with empathy. Anthony wasn't boasting or justifying, he was confessing. The silent storm hadn't died in the ring, it had died with Jonathan. Tonight wasn't a comeback.
It was a glimpse into a man carrying the weight of ghosts too heavy to share. Brandon's bitterness cracked, his bravado gone. He muttered, "You think this makes you noble?" His voice shook. Anthony met his gaze, unflinching. "No, it makes me human." The words echoed in the silent gym. Lauren stepped closer, her tone gentle. "You could have taught us. Why hide?" Anthony exhaled slowly. "Because the spotlight blinds. Out here, I can breathe." The honesty struck the students harder than any legend. Brandon lowered his eyes, defeated not just by skill, but by truth. Anthony picked up the mop again, his movements ordinary, almost invisible. Yet every student's gaze followed him with reverence. Lauren whispered softly, "Legends don't fade, they just change their storms." For the first time, Anthony's lips curved into the faintest smile, haunted but alive. The gym remained quiet, the echoes of the battle still heavy. Brandon sat slumped, unable to meet his students' eyes. They didn't scorn him, they pitied him. Anthony moved silently, the mop sliding across the floor as though nothing had happened. But nothing could erase what they'd seen. Lauren stepped forward once more, voice steady now. "You don't have to hide. We saw the truth." Anthony's gaze lifted briefly, sadness laced with resolve. Truth isn't always freedom. Sometimes, it's a cage. The words weighed heavy, silencing everyone again. Brandon's pride lay shattered, but his bitterness lingered. He muttered, "They'll forget, you're nothing now." But his voice lacked conviction. Anthony said nothing in return. The silence itself spoke louder, a quiet storm rolling beneath the surface. Lauren's resolve strengthened. She couldn't let the night end without answers. "If Jonathan were here, would he want you to hide?" The name froze Anthony mid-step. His hand tightened on the mop handle. Memories surged, blood, regret, the silence after the fall. Anthony's chest rose and fell sharply, his storm breaking for a moment. Brandon looked confused, but the students sensed the weight of the name. Anthony finally whispered, "He'd want me to remember him." And I do. Every day. The gym fell utterly silent. Lauren's voice softened. "Then maybe remembering means more than hiding." Anthony's gaze met hers, conflicted yet grateful. The silent storm wasn't gone, it had simply chosen a quieter battlefield. For Anthony Brooks, the fight had never been with opponents, but with himself. Anthony's silence lingered, heavy with unspoken truth. Brandon shifted uncomfortably, realizing the weight of his arrogance. His defeat wasn't just physical, it was moral. Anthony finally turned to the students, his voice steady. "Respect isn't earned by power. It's earned by humility." The room absorbed every word. Brandon lowered his head, his own lesson carved in humiliation. Lauren's heart pounded. She knew this night would echo beyond these walls. Anthony placed the mop against the wall, a quiet symbol of his chosen life. He didn't crave their applause, yet their reverence was undeniable. The silent storm hadn't returned for glory, he had returned to remind them of balance. Brandon's reign as a teacher ended that night, not by replacement, but by revelation. Anthony's legacy whispered louder than Brandon's pride ever had.
Brandon staggered toward the door, broken pride dragging with every step. His students didn't follow. Their eyes stayed on Anthony, the janitor who wasn't a janitor. Lauren stepped closer, her voice carrying resolve. "If you walk away again, you'll always be running." Anthony's expression flickered. Pain, guilt, hesitation. He looked at the floor, the mop standing silently against the wall. For years he had hidden behind it, burying his storm beneath routine. Tonight, the storm had broken free. He turned to Lauren, his eyes weary but alive. "And if I stay?" Lauren's lips curved slightly. "Then you teach us what storms really mean." The air thickened with possibility. Anthony hadn't planned for redemption, but sometimes storms return not for themselves, but for those who need them most. The students exchanged hopeful glances. They weren't just watching a fight,
They were witnessing the rebirth of a mentor. Brandon slipped out, his shadow forgotten. Anthony stood in the center, a man caught between past and present. Lauren's voice carried softly. "You don't need the spotlight. You only need the courage to share." Anthony inhaled slowly, his storm calming. He looked around the room, faces once mocking now filled with reverence. He didn't nod, didn't promise, but his silence was answer enough. The silent storm wasn't gone, it had transformed. He picked up the mop once more, but this time, it wasn't hiding him, it was grounding him. For Anthony Brooks, the legend wasn't about championships anymore. It was about legacy, etched quietly in every student's heart.
The gym slowly emptied, whispers trailing like echoes. Lauren lingered, watching Anthony closely. She saw beyond the legend. She saw the man burdened by ghosts. "Thank you," she said quietly. Anthony looked at her, surprised. "For what?" Lauren's voice trembled. "For reminding us that strength isn't just power, it's restraint." His gaze softened. The storm within him quieted further. Outside, rain began to patter against the windows, as if echoing his journey. Anthony turned toward the door, pausing. His life as a janitor wasn't a disguise anymore. It was a choice to live in humility, to teach without glory. Lauren watched him leave, her chest heavy with respect. The silent storm walked away, not defeated, not triumphant, but reborn in silence. Rain poured steadily as Anthony stepped into the night. Each drop whispered against the pavement, cleansing, forgiving. He inhaled deeply, the storm outside mirroring the one within. For years, he had hidden from the name, Silent Storm. Tonight, it had found him again, but in a different form. The fight had not been about Brandon. It had been about Anthony facing himself, his guilt, his silence. He walked with steady steps, the weight lighter than before. Back inside, Lauren watched from the doorway, eyes glistening. She knew the world might never know what happened here tonight. But she also knew legends don't need the world's stage. They only need a witness. And she had witnessed a storm, quiet, relentless, and unforgettable. Word spread quickly, though Anthony never sought it. The students whispered of the night the janitor humbled their instructor. Some spoke of fear, others of awe. But to those who truly watched, it wasn't about dominance, it was about discipline. Anthony continued his quiet work, mop in hand, silence his companion. Yet the respect in their eyes followed him everywhere. Brandon never regained his throne. The storm had stripped him of arrogance, leaving only lessons behind. Lauren carried the memory with her, knowing she had seen the truth. Anthony Brooks wasn't just a fighter. He was a man who bore storms alone, so others could find calm. Legends don't fade, she realized. They transform. Silent Storm wasn't gone. He had simply changed the way he thundered. Days turned to weeks, and life at the gym moved forward. Anthony remained quiet, mopping the same floors, carrying the same routine. But the whispers never faded. Students bowed slightly when they passed him, respect flowing naturally. Lauren approached him one evening, voice soft. "You can keep hiding if you want, but storms don't ask permission to be felt." Anthony paused, the faintest smile breaking his silence. He didn't answer. He didn't need to. The legend of Silent Storm wasn't about spotlight or victory. It was about resilience, humility, and the strength to carry scars without letting them define you. As he walked away, the rain began again, steady and rhythmic. Somewhere deep within, Anthony knew the truth. Storms never die. They only learn to whisper.